My grandsons haven't hugged me in 4 months because their stepmother convinced them I don't love them anymore. I'm 72 years old, my name is Dorothy Whitman, and I'm watching a 28-year-old woman systematically steal my dead daughter's children from me, one manipulated conversation at a time. What started as cold politeness has become calculated cruelty, and my son-in-law, the man I once loved like my own son, is choosing his new wife over his children's relationship with their only living grandmother. 7 years ago, when my precious daughter Caroline died of cancer at 34, I thought losing her was the worst pain imaginable. I was wrong. Watching someone deliberately erase your grandchildren's love for you while you're still alive? That's a special kind of hell I wouldn't wish on anyone. And the woman orchestrating this slow torture? She used to be the babysitter who promised to help keep our family together. 7 years ago, before tragedy struck our family like lightning, we were picture perfect in our own beautifully imperfect way. My daughter Caroline had married Brian Richardson when she was 25, and he was everything I could have dreamed of for her and more. Brian worked as an electrical engineer at the local power company, had kind blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and treated my Caroline like she was made of pure gold. He would surprise her with flowers on random Tuesdays, learn to cook her favorite meals when she was stressed from work, and never once raised his voice in anger during their entire 9-year marriage. They gave me 2 incredible grandsons who became the absolute light of my life. Marcus was born first, a serious, thoughtful child who loved building elaborate Lego creations and asking deep questions about how the world worked. 3 years later came Caleb, a bundle of pure energy who could make anyone laugh with his silly impressions and infectious giggle. Our family dinners every Sunday at my house were filled with animated conversations, inside jokes that would have us all doubled over with laughter, and the kind of unconditional love that makes you believe the world is fundamentally good and safe. Caroline and I talked every single day, sometimes 3 or 4 times depending on what was happening in our lives. She would call me on her way to work as a 3rd-grade teacher, during her lunch break to vent about difficult parents or share funny stories about her students, and again while she was making dinner to get recipe advice or just chat about our days. "Mom," she would say at least once a week, "I want to be exactly the kind of mother to my boys that you were to me." We planned elaborate birthday parties together, shared parenting advice and family traditions, and dreamed about watching Marcus and Caleb grow up, graduate from college, get married, and give us great-grandchildren to spoil rotten. Brian would joke that he married Caroline but got me and Harold as a bonus package deal, and he meant it in the most loving way possible. He genuinely enjoyed our family gatherings, sought out my husband's advice about home repairs and career decisions, and often said that having such involved grandparents made him feel incredibly grateful for the strong family foundation his children would have throughout their lives. "Dorothy," he would tell me while watching the boys play in our backyard, "I never had grandparents who were this present and loving. You and Harold are giving Marcus and Caleb something I never had, and I'll never take that for granted." In those golden years before everything went wrong, I was deeply involved in every aspect of my grandsons' lives. I attended every soccer game, school play, parent-teacher conference, and doctor's appointment. When Marcus struggled with reading in 2nd grade, I worked with him every afternoon for months until he not only caught up but exceeded grade level. When Caleb had nightmares about monsters under his bed, he would call me at midnight and I would drive over in my pajamas to check his room and read him back to sleep. The boys had their own bedrooms at my house, complete with toys, clothes, and all their favorite snacks, because they spent every weekend with Harold and me. Caroline encouraged this close relationship because she had grown up with the same kind of loving, involved grandparents who had enriched her childhood immeasurably. "I want the boys to have what I had," she would say. "I want them to know they have a whole village of people who love them unconditionally." We were that village, Caroline and Brian as the devoted parents, Harold and me as the doting grandparents, and even Jessica Palmer, who had been babysitting Marcus and Caleb for about a year and seemed to genuinely care about their well-being. Jessica was 21 when she first started watching the boys, a college student studying elementary education at the local university who needed part-time work to help pay for her tuition. She was quiet and somewhat reserved, but the children seemed comfortable with her, and she was reliable and responsible about following our family rules and routines. Caroline appreciated having someone she could trust when she and Brian wanted to go out for date nights or when she needed help during particularly busy weeks at school. When Caroline was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer in early 2017, our entire family rallied around her with fierce determination and unwavering love. Brian took extended leave from work to drive her to chemotherapy treatments and doctor's appointments. I moved in for 3 months to help with household duties, meal preparation, and childcare so that Caroline could focus entirely on fighting for her life. Harold handled all the yard work, home maintenance, and errands that Brian couldn't manage while caring for his sick wife. Even Jessica stepped up in ways that touched our hearts and made us feel incredibly grateful for her presence in our lives. She increased her babysitting hours to help with Marcus and Caleb during Caroline's sickest days, often staying overnight when Caroline was hospitalized for treatments. She was gentle and patient with the boys when they were scared and confused about their mother's illness, and she never complained about the additional responsibilities or the emotional weight of caring for children who were dealing with such a frightening situation. Jessica seemed to understand the gravity of what our family was facing, and she did everything possible to maintain normalcy and stability for Marcus and Caleb during those 18 months of treatment, hope, setbacks, and gradual decline. She helped them with homework, took them to soccer practice when Brian couldn't leave Caroline's side, and even learned to make their favorite meals so they would have consistent comfort during such an uncertain time. Caroline fought bravely for 18 months with a strength and grace that amazed everyone who knew her. She endured surgery, multiple rounds of chemotherapy, radiation, and experimental treatments that made her violently sick but gave us hope that she might beat the odds. During her brief periods of remission, she would throw herself into creating memories with Marcus and Caleb, planning special outings and traditions that she hoped would sustain them after she was gone. In her final weeks, when we all knew the cancer had won despite our prayers and medical interventions, Caroline made me promise something that I will carry in my heart until my dying day. She was in hospice care at our house, surrounded by family and friends who loved her deeply. One afternoon when it was just the two of us in her bedroom, she reached for my hand with what little strength she had left and whispered, "Mom, promise me you'll never let them forget how much I love them. Promise me you'll be their connection to me when I'm gone. Promise me you'll tell them stories about their childhood and help them remember the good times we had as a family." I promised her with every fiber of my being that I would love Marcus and Caleb unconditionally, keep her memory alive in their hearts, and be the grandmother who would help them navigate life without their mother. "They're going to need you so much," she said through tears. "Brian is going to need you too. You're the only mother figure they'll have left." I held her hand and swore that nothing would ever come between me and those precious boys, that I would be their constant source of love and stability no matter what challenges lay ahead. Caroline died on a Tuesday morning in October 2017, peacefully in her sleep with Brian holding one hand and me holding the other. The boys were at school, which is how she wanted it because she didn't want their last memory of her to be watching her take her final breath. Brian and I sat with her body for hours, crying together and trying to figure out how we were going to help two young children survive the loss of the most important person in their world. The first 2 years after Caroline's death were incredibly difficult for all of us, but Brian and I worked together like partners with the shared mission of helping Marcus and Caleb heal while keeping their mother's memory alive. The boys spent every weekend at my house, called me every night before bed to say prayers and talk about their day, and I attended every single school event, soccer game, teacher conference, and milestone moment in their lives. Brian would often bring the children over for dinner during the week, and we would look through photo albums together, sharing funny stories about Caroline and helping the boys process their grief in healthy ways. We established new traditions that honored Caroline's memory while also allowing space for healing and growth. Every year on Caroline's birthday, we would release balloons with messages to heaven. On Mother's Day, we would visit her grave and plant flowers while telling the boys about the kind of mother she had been and how proud she would be of the young men they were becoming. Brian frequently told me how grateful he was for my unwavering support during those dark months. "Dorothy," he would say while we watched Marcus and Caleb play in my backyard, "I honestly don't know how I would have gotten through this without you and Harold. You're not just their grandmother, you're their link to Caroline, their stability, their proof that they are deeply loved. I could never take that away from them." We were a family unit determined to honor Caroline's legacy by loving her children with everything we had. But somewhere during that second year, I started noticing subtle changes in Jessica's behavior that made me increasingly uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite articulate why at first. When she would come to family gatherings or help with the boys, she seemed progressively more distant and cold, especially toward Harold and me. She would barely make eye contact when we spoke, give one-word answers to my questions about school or her plans, and often sat scrolling through her phone instead of engaging with family conversations. I noticed that Jessica never asked about Caroline or seemed interested in the stories we shared about her life and personality. When I would tell Marcus and Caleb about their mother's childhood, her favorite things, or funny memories from when she was their age, Jessica would find excuses to leave the room or redirect the conversation to current events or practical matters. It felt like she was uncomfortable with any mention of Caroline's existence, as if talking about the boy's mother somehow threatened her position in their lives. There were other small things that bothered me but that I tried to rationalize because I didn't want to seem like a judgmental older woman who couldn't accept change. Jessica seemed visibly uncomfortable when Marcus and Caleb showed physical affection toward Harold and me. If Caleb would run to give me a big hug when I arrived at their house, Jessica would quickly redirect him to some activity or chore that needed immediate attention. When Marcus would excitedly tell me about his day at school or show me a project he was proud of, Jessica would interrupt with reminders about homework, dinner preparation, or household responsibilities. She never said anything directly critical or inappropriate, but her body language and timing made it increasingly clear that she didn't appreciate the close bond one shared with my grandsons. Her interference was subtle enough that I couldn't call her out without seeming oversensitive, but consistent enough that I began to dread family gatherings because I felt like I was walking on eggshells around her disapproval. I tried multiple times to build a genuine relationship with Jessica because I recognized how important she was becoming to Brian and the boys. I would ask about her college classes, compliment her cooking and help with household management, invite her to join Harold and me for shopping trips or coffee dates, and go out of my way to include her in conversations and family planning. But my efforts were always met with polite but distinctly cold responses that made me feel like I was bothering her rather than trying to build a family connection. "That's very nice of you, Dorothy, but I have other plans," became her standard response to any invitation. "Thanks for the offer, but we have everything under control," was how she deflected any assistance I tried to provide. She had perfected the art of rejecting overtures of friendship while maintaining plausible deniability about any rudeness or coldness. Brian seemed oblivious to the growing tension, or perhaps he was choosing to ignore it because Jessica was providing so much practical help with the children and household responsibilities. When I gently mentioned that Jessica seemed distant, he would defend her immediately. "She's just shy around people she doesn't know well," he would say. "She's wonderful with Marcus and Caleb, and that's what matters most right now. Give her time to adjust to being part of our family." But I could see that Jessica wasn't adjusting to being part of our existing family. She was quietly working to create a new family structure that didn't include meaningful roles for Harold and me. The changes were gradual enough that they might have seemed natural to someone who wasn't paying close attention, but I was watching every interaction with the keen eye of a grandmother who sensed that something fundamental was shifting in ways that would not benefit my grandsons. The real turning point came about 2.5 years after Caroline's death when Brian asked me to meet him for coffee at our favorite diner on a Saturday morning. He looked nervous and excited in a way I hadn't seen since before Caroline's diagnosis, and I had a sinking feeling in my stomach about what he was going to tell me. "Dorothy," he began, stirring his coffee more than necessary while avoiding direct eye contact, "I need to share something important with you, and I hope you'll understand and support my decision. Jessica and I have been talking seriously about getting married. She's been incredible with Marcus and Caleb, she makes me feel happy again for the first time since Caroline died, and I think it's time for us to become a real family." My heart sank like a stone, but I forced the most genuine smile I could manage because I knew Brian deserved happiness and companionship after everything he had endured. Caroline had been gone for over 2 years, and he was still a relatively young man at 37 who had every right to find love again and build a future that included joy alongside the grief that would always be part of his story. "Brian," I said carefully, choosing my words with deliberate thoughtfulness, "if Jessica makes you happy and is good to Marcus and Caleb, then I will support whatever decision you make. You know that all I want is what's best for you and the boys. You deserve to love and be loved again." But even as I said those supportive words, a cold feeling of dread settled in my stomach because I had witnessed Jessica's increasing distance from our family over the past year. I worried deeply about what her new role as Brian's wife and the boys' stepmother might mean for my relationship with Marcus and Caleb. Still, I pushed those concerns aside and focused on supporting Brian during this new chapter of his life, hoping that marriage might help Jessica feel more secure and therefore more welcoming toward the extended family who loved her future stepsons. The wedding took place 6 months later in Brian and Caroline's backyard, the same space where Caroline had hosted countless family barbecues and birthday parties during happier times. It was a small, simple ceremony with just immediate family and a few close friends, decorated with white flowers and string lights that created a romantic atmosphere despite the emotional complexity of the occasion. I tried my absolute best to be gracious and welcoming to Jessica on her wedding day, bringing a thoughtful gift and offering congratulations with genuine warmth. But when I approached her to offer a hug and best wishes for their future together, she gave me the briefest, stiffest embrace possible before immediately turning to talk to someone else. When I asked if there was anything I could do to help with wedding preparations or if she needed advice about blending families with children, she smiled with what I was beginning to recognize as her signature cold politeness and said, "Thanks, Dorothy, but we have everything under control." That phrase, "we have everything under control," became Jessica's standard response to any offer of help, advice, or involvement I made from that point forward. It was her polite but unmistakable way of telling me that my assistance, guidance, and presence were neither wanted nor needed in their new family structure. The changes in our family dynamics started immediately after the honeymoon but accelerated quickly over the following months. Brian used to call me several times a week to chat about the boys' activities, share funny stories about their daily lives, and ask for advice about parenting decisions or family planning. Those calls became noticeably less frequent and significantly shorter in duration. When I would call their house to check in or make plans with Marcus and Caleb, Jessica would often answer the phone with a tone that suggested I was interrupting something important. "Brian's not available right now," she would say before I even asked to speak with him. "Can I take a message?" When I would leave detailed messages about wanting to plan weekend visits or attend upcoming school events, those messages never seemed to get delivered, or if they did, the responses came days later with apologies about miscommunication and scheduling conflicts. The boys' weekend visits to my house, which had been a sacred weekly tradition since Caroline's death, began to change dramatically. What had been every single weekend became every other weekend, then once a month, and eventually became sporadic occasions that required advance notice and Jessica's explicit approval based on her assessment of the family schedule and the boys' needs. "The boys have so much going on with school and sports," Jessica would explain when I called to arrange visits. "Brian and I think it's important for them to have downtime at home to just be a normal family without constantly running around to different houses and activities." The implication was clear: my house was now considered an additional obligation rather than a source of joy and family connection. I started noticing that I was no longer being informed about important events and milestones in Marcus and Caleb's lives. I would find out about soccer games, school plays, parent-teacher conferences, or awards ceremonies after they had already happened, usually through casual mentions in conversations or social media posts from other family members who had been invited to attend. When I asked Brian directly why I wasn't being included in these important moments, he would look genuinely confused and say, "I'm sorry, Dorothy. I thought Jessica had called you about that." When I asked Jessica about specific events, she would claim there had been a miscommunication, that she thought Brian had contacted me, or that the event was designated as immediate family only by the school or organization. The boys themselves began acting noticeably different around me during our increasingly rare visits. They seemed more reserved and less spontaneous with their affection and enthusiasm. When I would ask about school, friends, sports, or their feelings about their new family situation, they would give shorter answers and frequently look to Jessica for approval or guidance before sharing any details about their lives. I could feel them pulling away emotionally, and it broke my heart because I knew this growing distance wasn't coming from them naturally. It was being carefully cultivated by someone who wanted to diminish my role and influence in their lives. The boys had always been open, affectionate, and communicative with me, but now our conversations felt stilted and superficial, as if they had been coached about what was appropriate to share with their grandmother. One particularly painful incident occurred during Marcus's 13th birthday party, an event that highlighted just how dramatically my role in the family had changed. I had always been heavily involved in planning and hosting the boys' birthday celebrations, working with Caroline and then Brian to create memorable experiences that reflected each child's personality and interests. But for Marcus's 13th birthday, I received a last-minute invitation to what was clearly an already fully planned and organized event. When I arrived at their house with Marcus's carefully chosen gift, the party was in full swing with Jessica's parents, her siblings, and their children, several of her friends from college, and numerous children from Marcus's school that I didn't recognize. I felt like a complete stranger at my own grandson's birthday party, sitting on the periphery while other people took center stage in celebrating this important milestone. When I approached Marcus to give him his present and the traditional birthday hug that had been our custom since he was a toddler, Jessica immediately stepped between us with a bright but controlling smile. "Oh Marcus," she said in a cheerful voice that somehow managed to sound dismissive, "why don't you open Grandma Dorothy's gift later with the rest of the presents? Right now we need you to help blow out the candles with your little sister Zoe." Then she guided him away to participate in cake-cutting activities with the other children, leaving me standing alone with his unopened gift. I spent the entire 2-hour party sitting by myself on their patio, watching other people celebrate my grandson while feeling completely invisible and unwelcome in what used to be my own family gathering. Harold and I left early, claiming we had another commitment, and I cried during the entire 20-minute drive home. "She's systematically pushing us out," I told my husband through my tears. "I can feel it happening step by step, and I don't know how to stop it without causing the kind of family drama that will only hurt Marcus and Caleb more." Harold, always the peacemaker and eternal optimist, encouraged me to give Jessica more time to adjust and to try even harder to build a positive relationship with her. "Maybe she feels threatened by your close bond with the boys," he suggested gently. "Maybe if you step back a little and let her establish herself as their primary mother figure, she'll feel more secure in her role and start including you more in family activities." So I tried stepping back, hoping that giving Jessica space would eventually lead to a more inclusive family dynamic. I waited for invitations instead of assuming I was welcome at family events. I asked permission before making any plans with Marcus and Caleb. I complimented Jessica's parenting decisions and deferred to her preferences about schedules and activities. I bought thoughtful gifts for her birthday and Mother's Day, hoping to show respect for her new role in the boys' lives. But instead of improving our relationship or creating more opportunities for family connection, my efforts to be respectful and accommodating seemed to signal to Jessica that she could push me even further to the margins of Marcus and Caleb's lives without facing any significant resistance or consequences. Then Jessica became pregnant with her first biological child, and everything became significantly worse in ways I hadn't even imagined possible. Suddenly, she was too tired or too sick to facilitate visits between the boys and me. She needed Brian's constant help with doctor's appointments, pregnancy symptoms, and preparation for the new baby, which meant he had even less time for phone calls, family visits, and maintaining connections with our side of the family. When I offered to help with household chores, meal preparation, or childcare so she could rest during her pregnancy, she declined every single offer with that same cold smile and her standard response, "Thanks, Dorothy, but we have everything under control." Meanwhile, her own mother seemed to have unlimited access to their house and was constantly posting pictures on social media of herself cooking meals, organizing baby supplies, and spending quality time with Marcus and Caleb. When baby Zoe was born, I was not invited to the hospital and found out about her birth through a Facebook post that Jessica shared with everyone except our immediate family. When I called Brian to congratulate them and ask when I could meet my new step-granddaughter, he sounded exhausted and overwhelmed. "Dorothy, things are really hectic right now with adjusting to a newborn and helping Marcus and Caleb adapt to being big brothers," he said in a voice that sounded nothing like the warm, welcoming man I had known for over a decade. "Maybe in a few weeks when we've settled into a routine and Jessica is feeling stronger." Those few weeks turned into months of excuses and delays. Every time I asked to visit, offered to help with the new baby, or suggested taking Marcus and Caleb for a few hours to give the new parents a break, I was told it wasn't a good time. The house was too chaotic for visitors. Jessica was still recovering from delivery. The boys needed to bond with their new sister without distractions. The baby's schedule was too unpredictable for planning visits. Meanwhile, Jessica's family seemed to have unlimited access to the house and the children. Her mother was there almost daily, helping with meals and baby care. Her sister brought her own children over for regular playdates. Her parents took Marcus and Caleb on special outings and adventures that I learned about through social media posts showing my grandsons having wonderful experiences with people who were essentially strangers to them a year earlier. I tried to talk to Brian about feeling excluded from this new chapter of their family life, but he always defended Jessica's decisions and made excuses for her behavior that painted me as unreasonable for wanting to be involved. "She's overwhelmed with a new baby and trying to help Marcus and Caleb adjust to their new roles as big brothers," he would explain with growing impatience. You have to understand that she's working hard to bond with the boys as their mother figure, and having too many parental figures around might confuse them or undermine her authority. That comment stung more deeply than anything else he could have said because I had never tried to replace Caroline as the boy's mother or undermine anyone's parental authority. I had simply tried to be a loving grandmother who kept their mother's memory alive while providing the kind of unconditional support and stability that grandparents are supposed to offer during difficult family transitions. But Jessica seemed determined to not only replace Caroline as the boy's primary mother figure but to erase any evidence that Caroline had ever existed or that her family had any legitimate role in Marcus and Caleb's lives moving forward. Over the next 3 years, as Jessica had 2 more children, baby Henry and little Grace, my access to Marcus and Caleb became even more severely restricted and conditional. I was consistently told that the house was too chaotic for visitors, that the boys were too busy with school and sports to visit me, and that family time needed to be reserved for their immediate family unit. When I suggested taking just Marcus and Caleb out for lunch, movies, or other activities that wouldn't disrupt the household routine, Jessica would find creative reasons why those plans weren't possible or appropriate. The boys had too much homework. They needed to help with their younger siblings. They had social commitments with friends. Brian needed their assistance with yard work or household projects. Every excuse sounded reasonable in isolation, but the cumulative effect was that I went from seeing my grandsons multiple times per week to maybe once or twice per month, and those visits were always brief, supervised, and structured in ways that prevented any meaningful connection or private conversation. The most devastating blow came last Christmas when I learned through a neighbor that Marcus and Caleb had spent Christmas morning at Jessica's parents' house, opened presents, had a big family dinner with extended relatives I had never met, and participated in new holiday traditions that had no connection to their previous family history or their mother's memory. When I called Brian on Christmas afternoon to wish everyone happy holidays and find out why we hadn't been included in any Christmas plans, he sounded surprised and uncomfortable to hear from me. "Oh Dorothy," he said with obvious awkwardness, "I thought Jessica had told you we were going to her parents' house this year. We wanted to establish some new family traditions that include all the kids together and help Marcus and Caleb feel more connected to their extended stepfamily. New family traditions that didn't include Harold and me. New holiday memories that had no connection to Caroline's legacy or the Christmas traditions she had loved and wanted to pass down to her children." I hung up the phone and sobbed uncontrollably because I realized that I was being systematically erased from my grandsons' lives, and there was nothing I could do to stop it without causing the kind of family conflict that would ultimately hurt Marcus and Caleb more than it would help them. Now, 7 years after Caroline's death and 4 years into Brian and Jessica's marriage, I barely see my grandsons at all. Marcus is 17 now, a senior in high school who's learning to drive, thinking about college applications, and probably dating girls I'll never meet. Caleb is 14, playing freshman football and navigating the social complexities of high school without any guidance or support from the grandmother who once knew every detail of his daily life. When I do manage to see them briefly at the few family functions I'm still invited to, usually major holidays where my complete exclusion would be too obvious for even Jessica to justify, they're polite but emotionally distant. They call me Grandma Dorothy instead of just Grandma like they used to when I was their primary grandmother figure. They don't run to hug me when I arrive or linger to talk when it's time for me to leave. They don't call me with exciting news, ask for advice about problems they're facing, or share the kind of personal thoughts and feelings that used to make our relationship so special and meaningful. Jessica is currently pregnant with her 4th child, and I know that once this baby arrives, any remaining connection I have to Marcus and Caleb will likely disappear completely. They'll be so deeply embedded in Jessica's vision of their family structure that they won't even notice my absence anymore, just like they probably don't remember how close we used to be or how much joy our relationship brought to all of us during their younger years. The hardest part of this entire situation is that I don't think Brian is intentionally trying to hurt me or damage my relationship with his sons. I genuinely believe that he loves Jessica and wants to support her role as his children's mother figure because he thinks that's what's best for their emotional stability and family unity. But in choosing to consistently defer to all of Jessica's decisions about family relationships, boundaries, and social connections, he has allowed her to quietly eliminate the most important relationship his sons had to their biological mother and her family legacy. He has prioritized his new wife's comfort and preferences over his children's need for grandparental love and connection to their extended family. I lie awake at night wondering what Caroline would think if she could see what's happening to her precious boys. She trusted me to keep her memory alive for them, to be their constant source of unconditional love, and to help them navigate the challenges of growing up without their mother's guidance and support. Instead, I'm watching them disappear into a new family structure where their mother's existence is treated like an inconvenient complication that's better left unmentioned and unremembered. They're being raised by a stepmother who seems determined to erase any evidence of Caroline's influence on their lives and any connection to the family who knew and loved Caroline deeply. Sometimes I think about confronting Jessica directly and demanding that she stop undermining my relationship with Marcus and Caleb. I've rehearsed conversations in my mind where I calmly but firmly explain how much damage she's causing and insist that she find ways to include me more meaningfully in the boys' lives. But what good would that confrontation actually do? Jessica would deny any intentional wrongdoing and claim that she's simply trying to create stability for her blended family. Brian would defend her decisions and paint me as the difficult, interfering grandmother who can't accept the new family dynamic. The boys would be caught in the middle of adult conflict and would probably lose what little access I still have to them. Other times I think about making one final appeal to Brian, explaining in detail how much it hurts to be excluded from his sons' lives and asking him to prioritize their need for grandparental love over his wife's apparent discomfort with my presence. But Brian has made his choice crystal clear through 4 years of actions that consistently support Jessica's preferences over my relationship with Marcus and Caleb. So I'm trapped in this horrible limbo where I'm watching my grandsons grow up from a distance, catching occasional glimpses of their lives through brief social media posts and secondhand updates from mutual acquaintances who still have more access to them than I do. I'm grieving the loss of my daughter all over again, except this time the loss is ongoing and deliberate rather than sudden and unavoidable. Last month, I saw Marcus at the grocery store with a group of his friends, and he barely acknowledged me beyond a polite wave across the produce section. This young man who used to climb into my lap every weekend and tell me all his secrets and dreams treated me like a distant acquaintance he vaguely recognized but had no real connection to. When I got to my car in the parking lot, I sat there and cried for 20 minutes because I realized that Jessica has achieved exactly what she set out to accomplish from the very beginning. She has successfully transformed Marcus and Caleb from my beloved grandsons who miss their mother into her stepsons who have been taught to see their paternal grandmother as an unnecessary intrusion in their family life. She has accomplished this systematic elimination without ever saying a single directly cruel word to me or making any obviously inappropriate demands. She has simply created an environment where my love and presence are consistently treated as burdensome rather than valuable, and where the boys have been gradually conditioned to see me as peripheral to their lives rather than essential to their emotional well-being. And the most heartbreaking part is that I don't think Marcus and Caleb even realize what they've lost or what's been taken from them. They were so young when this gradual process of alienation began that they probably don't remember how close we used to be, how much our relationship meant to all of us, or how much joy and stability our connection provided during the most difficult period of their young lives. They've been slowly but systematically taught to see me as an outsider rather than family, and now that perspective feels completely natural to them because it's been reinforced through years of subtle messaging and social conditioning. I know that I'm running out of time to salvage any meaningful relationship with Marcus and Caleb before they become adults and move away to start their own independent lives. Once they're 18 and living on their own, attending college or starting careers, any chance of rebuilding our bond will be lost forever. They'll go through all the major milestones of young adulthood: graduation, college, first jobs, serious relationships, marriage, children, without ever knowing how much their grandmother loved them or how desperately she fought to remain part of their lives despite facing constant rejection and exclusion from the people who controlled access to them. Caroline is gone forever, and now I'm losing her children too. Not to tragedy or circumstances beyond anyone's control, but to one woman's selfish and calculated determination to create a family structure that has no room for their paternal grandmother's love, wisdom, or connection to their mother's legacy. And there's absolutely nothing I can do about it except watch from the sidelines as the most precious relationships in my life slowly disappear into someone else's vision of what their family should look like. My name is Dorothy Whitman, I'm 72 years old, and I used to be a grandmother who mattered deeply in 2 young boys' lives. Now I'm just a woman who loves 2 young men from a distance and hopes that someday, somehow, before it's too late, they'll remember how much their grandmother loved them and find their way back to the relationship we once shared. But honestly, After 4 years of watching Jessica systematically dismantle every connection I had to Marcus and Caleb while everyone around me pretends not to notice what's happening, I'm starting to lose hope that day will ever come. And that might be the most heartbreaking realization of all.